Thank you for the welcome. Very good to be here in beautiful Wales. Some scientists believe that human beings are badly designed. The reason they believe that is because they say, well, if we've evolved from apes, then we must be a bad design because apes are designed to walk on 4 limbs and we walk on 2 legs, and there's not enough time to design a good body. So some scientists believe that we've come from apes and we're a bad design. But there are many scientists today in the world who believe we have not come from apes. We were specially designed and created, as it says in Genesis, God created Adam and Eve, and also that we're a very good design, as it says in Psalm 139, verse 14. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And I'm a scientist who falls into that last camp, believing that God has made us specially and that we're well designed. And I've mentioned that a few times in my university career, teaching at Bristol University, wearing my Bristol University jumper today, and also teaching at Cambridge and some other universities. But I want to start by proving this is a hot potato topic, because in 2003 I had a letter from the Bright Atheist Society, and it was a bit of a surprise. They'd heard that I'd mentioned to my students that some people believe in special creation. So they said, "Dear Stuart, they've heard that I sometimes discuss design in nature with my students. They thought that was a very serious situation and would ensure I was called to account for speaking to students about creation." And then they often finished by saying, as always, we wish to be fair before proceeding to the next stage. I never knew what the next stage was: assassination, abduction, torture. So it was quite worrying. Well, after 2003, I thought maybe I shouldn't say so much in the classroom. This is a hot potato topic. So I just very briefly said to the students, the whole origin of man question is quite controversial. I'll just keep my head low because I don't want, lots of bad publicity. But then in 2006, I had another surprise because I was in the coffee room with my colleagues, and my colleague sitting opposite was reading the Times newspaper, and I was looking at the front page, and the front page said, "Intelligent design creeps onto courses," talking about university courses. And I said to my colleague, "Someone's in trouble." And he said, yes, someone is in trouble. And it's you, because your picture is on the inside. And I thought, but I've been keeping my head down. I just said to the students, this is a controversial subject. And then later in the year, there was another article in the Telegraph, and it had Richard Dawkins, who was described as a pin-up boy for atheists, and I was described as a pin-up boy for creation. I'd never been a pin-up boy before. But there were some other advantages of this. I thought, well, now I may as well be really open about my beliefs. There's no point keeping my head down. I'm just in the national press for creeping intelligent design onto university courses. So this is a hot potato topic. The last 5 years, I've actually been writing a book called Ultimate Engineering. And having worked on it really hard for the last 5 years, it actually comes out in 3 days, 3.5 hours' time. So it comes out on Thursday. So this is quite good timing. And in the book, really the whole topic of the book is, are we well designed or badly designed? So if you don't follow everything in this talk, you just buy the book on Thursday. So claims of bad design contradict science. So, for example, there's an author in the United States called Nathan Lentz, and thousands, if not millions of students are reading his books. He's a professor from New York, and he says, well, according to evolution, our foot should be a really bad design with pointless bones. He hasn't done research on the feet, but he claims there must be a bad design if we come from apes. But on the right-hand side, There's a quotation from a medical book. If you read what actual experts think, they say it's a brilliant design. So we have on the one hand what the atheist professor says, that we're a bad design, but if you speak to an expert in the field, they say no, they're wrong. It's a brilliant design. So someone is not telling the truth, and it's going to be the person who's not the expert who's not telling the truth. Nathan Lentz has said the same about the hands. He said, our wrist is full of useless bones, but if you read the words of an expert in the field, here's a quotation on the right. This scientist said, our hands are astonishingly complex, brilliantly designed. Far better to believe the expert in the field rather than the atheist Nathan Lentz, who has an agenda. He doesn't want people to believe in the Bible. That's the real agenda. But I can go on. There's another author in the States, read by a lot of students. She's called Abby Hafer, and she said, the human eye, it's wired backwards. It's a bad design. And some of you might have heard, I've heard Richard Dawkins said the eye is wired backwards. But if you read the words of an expert optician, they will tell you the eye is not wired backwards. It is perfection of design, far better than any camera. So again, do you believe the atheist scientist who claims bad design, or do you believe the expert who actually knows what they're talking about? And then we could, this is my favorite example. Richard Dawkins has said the innards of an animal, including the heart, are a shambles. He said it's a terrible, he looks inside the human body, he thinks it's a shambles. Well, there's a top professor at Imperial College called Sean Harding. It's a female professor who's a world authority on the heart. Richard Dawkins has never studied the heart, but Sean Harding has studied the heart for 30 or 40 years. And her conclusion is that the human heart is absolute perfection of design. So who should you believe? Should you believe Sean Harding, who studied the heart for 40 years and says it's perfect? Or should you believe Richard Dawkins, who's never studied the heart and says, well, it must be a bad design, because if we've evolved from apes, it must be a bad design? Do you want to believe true science that says the human body is a brilliant design, or do you want to believe these atheist claims who believe the human body is a bad design? Well, I think you can see what I'm recommending. And I could go on with other authors like Jerry Coyne, and he says evolution predicts bad design, but we do not see bad design in the human body. The reason I wrote Ultimate Engineering, this topic I'm talking about tonight, is this. I've worked at the forefront of engineering technology. I helped design Envisat, the world's largest Earth observation satellite. It has an incredible number of parts. It has millions of design details, and it took an immense effort to design. I remember being so nervous when that satellite was launched. I was in charge of designing the whole solar array, which is on the right-hand side. The whole satellite cost £2 billion, and if my solar array didn't work within 50 minutes, the whole mission was dead. And that really focuses the mind when you're designing something like that. But I've also worked in biomechanics. I've worked in bio-inspired design, prosthetics design, designing prosthetic knees, feet. So I'm very familiar with the human body. I'm actually in quite a unique position. I can compare the best of human design with God's design in the human body. And what I can tell you is that the design we see in the human body is far, far superior to the best technology that humans have ever produced. And that points to creation. Because according to an atheistic, naturalistic, evolutionary view of the world, the natural world should not be as good as human technology, because the blind process of evolution is so restricted, whereas, of course, a human design is not restricted in design, and God is even less restricted because he has perfect knowledge. And this is what I explain in my book. So I have this chart and I say, look, evolution is very restricted in lots of ways. So if evolution was true, the human body would be a really bad design. And then I explain, you read a verse like Psalm 18, verse 30, God's way is perfect. God is not capable of doing an imperfect design. And so we expect the human body to be better than human technology. And all through the book, I explain the human body is always better than man-made technology. Now, some people will understandably say, but how about disease and genetic disorders? The answer to that is that disease is not a design fault. The same with aging. Aging is not a design fault. It's just a fact of the world that we live in. And the same with genetic disorders. And it's useful giving an analogy. You think of a really wonderful Italian, German, or English Jaguar motor car. Cars will break down in extreme weather. If you try and drive across the North Pole, your car's going to break down. Also, a car will age and get rusty. That's not a design fault. And if there's a fault in the factory, again, that's not a design fault. So you have to separate disease, genetic disorders, and design. When I look at the human body, I just see brilliant design. Of course, if someone is born with a genetic fault and they're born blind, that's not how God originally designed Adam and Eve. We live in a fallen world where everything is decaying. But if you put those genetic disorders to one side, you can observe brilliant design. So I just go through a few examples. The last 3 Olympics, I've helped design British Olympic cycling teams' bicycles, particularly the chain drive, and we've topped the bicycle medal table the last 3 Olympics. And one of the reasons we got the friction down to around 0.1. And I said to my researchers, go and look up what is the friction level in human joints, the synovial fluid, because I reckon it's going to be lower than 0.1. And we had the lowest of all the Olympic teams, which is one of the main reasons we won the most gold medals. So my researcher came back and he said, you're not going to believe how low the sliding friction is in human joints. And I said, well, is it 10% lower? He said, no. I said, is it 50% lower? No. Is it 100% lower? And he said, no, you cannot believe. It is 0.002. And I said, but that's impossible. That's 1/50th of what we have. It'll take us 1,000 Olympics and we still wouldn't get that low in sliding friction. That's even lower than if we were using ball bearings. How is that possible? But then we discovered you had these incredible mechanisms that we cannot reproduce in the lab to produce low friction. This gives you an idea of how superior design is in the human body compared to the best of human technology. That doesn't happen by chance. In a couple of weeks, I'm speaking in America. I don't need to do this one here, but I'm explaining how we thrashed the American team. They kept coming second. We kept coming first, but I'll save that one for a couple of weeks when I'm in. I always explain to them how they keep coming second to Team GB. But the second example is the foot. If you look carefully at these so-called clever robots like Asimo and Octopus and some of these other Elon Musk's robots, you notice they only have 1 or 2 joints in the feet, and their feet are basically flat. The human foot has 33 joints, and you can stand on the toes, and be very, very good at sport. Someone said, do not mention that sport with an oblong ball today. But humans are very good at running, sprinting, a vast array of sports. Robots are so clumsy, so slow. They cannot play sport. They cannot run. Again, like that synovial fluid, the difference between designing the human body and the best of human technology is vast. The same with the hand. I might have given a talk previously on the wonder of the human hand. We can do movements like this writing movement that robots cannot do. Robots can do this relatively simple flex. Robots can do a simple extend. But when you do this, you're combining flexion and extension in one movement, and engineers cannot work out how that is possible. Of course, we think it's dead easy, but there are so many things we can do with our hands that robots cannot do. One of my favorite examples in the book, I have about 15 chapters of the human body. I'm only going to go through about 10 now, but the fourth one is the human throat. On the left is a beautiful flute. But what you notice with the flute is it has lots of different mechanisms for different sounds, different pitches. And in my book, I quote this Japanese surgeon who said, what is astounding about the human throat is that it only has one pair of vocal folds. He said, in the case of a musical instrument, it almost always has lots of mechanisms, but the human voice only has one pair of vocal folds, and it has more beauty and more control than all of those musical instruments. And not only that, but the throat doesn't just sing, it also breathes, and it swallows food, and it has 100 muscles to do those things with precision. It's just an astounding design. It's one of my favorite chapters. Then I have a chapter on the wiring system in the human body. I had to wire the solar panels on the Envisat satellite. I had to do at least around 5 kilometers of wiring because the solar array was about the size of a badminton court, and there were 288 power lines and other lines that had to come down. But then if you look at the human body, it is 150,000 kilometers of wiring, and the wires reach every cubic millimeter of your body. And if you don't believe me, when you get home, get a pin and prick yourself over your whole body. You won't find anywhere that doesn't hurt from a pinprick. Now, for the branching to get to every cubic millimeter is just mind-blowing from an engineering point of view. Whichever part of the human body you look at, the human body is vastly superior to the best of human technology, exactly what you'd expect if God had designed man. Another one of my favorite examples is giving birth, human birth, because in my university I've published papers developing artificial muscle, and the best artificial muscle we can produce in universities is never comes close to the performance of human muscle. To give you one extreme example, happens during birth. The pelvic floor muscles in birth stretch by over 3 times. So if it's a pelvic floor muscle starts like that, they end up being 3 times longer. Engineers cannot get anywhere near that kind of stretching or performance. And it's amazing how you have hormones which cause this rapid dilation, and you have what's called positive feedback. The more stretch you get, the more it wants to stretch. A very unusual example of positive feedback that engineers are really interested in. People have said to me, you saw all of your children being given birth to, 5 children. Was that really profound? And I said, yes, it was absolutely profound. The biomechanics of those pelvic floor muscles was just mind-blowing. To see it in real action was really amazing. Then I have a chapter on The eye explaining that the human eye is far superior to any camera or video system. The resolution of the eye is superior. The dynamic range of the eye for shading is superior. But most of all, the eye is more compact and more precise than a camera. The pupil is, really tiny, and yet it is more accurate than a camera shutter system, which is much more bulky. And I mentioned earlier, recent researchers have described the human eye as perfect design, despite what Richard Dawkins would claim the eye is a bad design. He's never studied, never researched the eye. The human ear, it's another example I give in my book. It doesn't just have those three special tiny bones that form a chain to get the signals going into the inner ear, but it has muscles that fine-tunes the stiffness, and engineers are just blown away. Engineers are in awe of every detail of the human body. I mentioned the heart earlier. The human heart can last 100 years. The very best engineered hearts last up to 1 year. That's after hundreds of millions of pounds of research and development. That's with the best engineers. The best engineers in the world cannot compete with God. God is infinitely above the best engineers. And if you want the best example, I really encourage you to go to the website and look up the Chinese Football League for robots, where you have 3 robots playing against 3 other robots. You must watch it because it is really hilarious. These robots just stumble around, not knowing what to do, hardly recognizing the ball. And if my 4-year-old grandchildren, because I've got 3 grandchildren around 4 years old, they would thrash these robots. They would just run circles around them. If you want to know how superior is the human body to the best of human technology, just look at this robot league. In my book, I explained that God created the world initially with perfection, and then gradually things are declining. In a fallen world, we have this decay. So when I was writing my book, I realized that the previous authors had said God's design is very good, it's overwhelming evidence of design, but I had a kind of revelation. I thought, I have judged thousands of designs in my life. I cannot judge God's design because they are perfect. I can't give it A+. I can't give it a first-class honors. I just have to say, God, they're perfect, which is why I then wrote in my book, this is ultimate engineering. You cannot improve, you cannot come up with a better design of any single part of the human body. I have worked with the best designers in the world. NASA, ESA, Panasonic, you name the company, I've worked with the best. Nothing compares with God. And I went to 2 conferences last year in the United States, kind of design conferences, intelligent design conferences, and I said to my colleagues, we have understated God's design. We've made a mistake. We've called it very good. It's not very good. It's perfect. And they basically agreed, and we all repented together and said, we have to call God's design perfection. Obviously, we now live in a decaying, fallen world, but God obviously created with perfection. And a second thing I noticed writing my book is that God has perfectly produced diversity in creation. A good designer explores the design space, the fastest, the highest, the deepest, the most efficient. God has done that because when I look at creation, you cannot get bigger than a dinosaur. You cannot get bigger than a blue whale. You cannot get faster than a cheetah on land. You cannot get faster than a sailfish in the sea. And in my book, I show that whichever corner of creation you look at, God with perfection has explored what we call the design space, design possibilities. You see God's perfection in the stars, the galaxies, the whole of creation, not just the human body. So this is the book that's coming out on Thursday. Let me see. Yeah, if you're interested, there's a myth that intelligent design people don't publish papers, but they do. Basically, this gets to the end. So on Thursday, the book comes out, Ultimate Engineering, arguing that the human body has perfection of design. And I show that my argument is supported by true science. And I plead with people to recognize the misleading lies being put forward by people like Richard Dawkins, who are pushing an ideology, not pushing science. It's going to be quite a controversial book, will be a hot potato book. The last chapter of the book, I give my personal experience from academia and the stories I told you at the beginning with the Times, Telegraph, and the Brights. I have dozens and dozens and dozens more examples of that, showing how my university has supported me in my free speech, believing in intelligent design, and my bosses and my colleagues. So I think if you're interested in that side of things, then you should consider getting the book. I do have a few other books for sale at the back, some more recent books that I've produced, one on sport, how to be good at rugby, and another book on wonders of creation, and some other books you're welcome to look at. But now we can think about forming questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stuart. I don't think I'll be alone in saying I could sit there and listen to you for hours and hours. It's just tremendous. And what a wonderful thing just to be able to reflect on the amazing way in which we've been created. There's only one or two questions on at the moment. So if you've got a question you'd like Stuart to answer, then please go, as is on the screen, to slido.com, type in hot potato, and then ask your question. This question says, Stuart, can you send a copy of your book to David Attenborough? I mean, on that, I guess a related question is, I often wonder, when you look at someone like David Attenborough and see the incredible detail within which he sees creation, do you scratch your head when you see some of the conclusions that he comes to?
One thing I would say is, not just David Attenborough, but Richard Dawkins, there are quotations where they say something like, biology is the study of complicated things that look design, that have the appearance of design, but for which we must remember they weren't designed, i.e., they admit the evidence is that they were designed. But they have what's called a prior commitment to atheism. Whatever the evidence shows, they have to believe in atheism. So they'll often say, yeah, I agree with you, it looks designed. And that's what my colleagues tell me in my university. But really, this comes down to worldviews. If you're a committed atheist, then you must ignore the evidence for design. And this is what we see with David Attenborough.
Great, thank you. Okay, there's another question here. Where's it gone? Have you copied God's design ever?
Yes. Yep. So just very briefly, you might have seen a couple of papers. For example, a couple of years ago, I published a paper on one of the most advanced prosthetic feet, where I was copying the toe joints on the ball of the foot to enable a robot or a human with a prosthetic foot to stand on their toes. So I was copying the toe joints, and I was also copying some of the ankle bones and some of the tendons. And one of the conclusions of my paper was that to advance prosthetics, we need to copy God's design more, although I didn't say God's design, I said the design of the human body more, because this was a secular paper. But at the end of that paper, I did say that the wonderful design of the human body is a challenge to the theory of evolution. So I did get that into a secular paper. But yeah, a lot of my work involves copying God's design. Many engineers copy God's designs, which is a testimony to his great designs and also evidence for creation.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions which I think are connected. I'll link these two together. It says here, do you think, as an engineer, used to working with designed objects, you have a bias towards looking for things to be designed for a purpose? So that's the one question. But I think this one's connected to it as well, because it says here, I appreciate that at the moment the robots we make do not come anywhere near our body, but do you not think, in tune with further skills, we'll do better? So,
yeah. So first of all, the first one, if designing a spacecraft to work reliably is very difficult. I mentioned there are millions of design details on a spacecraft, and I say to my students, if you got 99.9% in your maths exam, you would be ecstatic, and you should be ecstatic. But on a spacecraft, that's complete failure. 99.9% is utter failure. The spacecraft will not work. You need virtually 100%, or 99.9999999%. I worked in a team with hundreds of top designers. We worked for 10 years. We had to get the information so perfect. And not just myself, but my colleagues would say, design does not happen by chance. If you have designed something, you realize it does not happen by chance. And I would turn the question the other way around. Has Richard Dawkins ever designed anything? Because if he did try to design something, he would suddenly learn it's difficult. You have to coordinate. You have three-dimensional parts that interact in the most complex way to produce very complicated physical effects. You have to design top-down. I'm a professional engineer. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers have guidelines on how to design, and they say you must design top-down, not bottom-up. It's just impossible to produce a system organically from the bottom up. It has to be top-down. And so everything I've learned in engineering teaches me that design reveals a designer. This is the design argument. Design always reveals a designer. So what was the second?
The second bit was about, okay, well, maybe we're not doing very well at the moment in terms of the performance of robots, but over time, maybe we're quite early days, maybe in 100 years, they'll be pretty close.
Yeah, there's no doubt there will be lots of improvements, but I gave you a couple of examples. We are in a completely different league to God. I gave you the example with the synovial fluid. But I definitely would urge you for your enjoyment and amusement, but learning, to look at that Chinese football league with those three robots walking around. The gap between that and a professional footballer can run 25 miles an hour, leap in the air, intercept a ball in the air in a split second, keep it under control, and then shoot. Yeah, engineers dream of producing a robot that could do that. Or think of building a robot that could enter the Olympics for skateboarding or BMXing, where they jump up and they do twirls, and it's impossible. It's impossible to conceive of being able to replicate what humans and other animals do. The gap is so great. At this very moment, I've been asked to write a review paper for the Institute of Physics comparing the human body with robots. I'm actually doing that at the moment. So this question is absolutely my field. And I'll be saying in that paper, yeah, engineers must be inspired by the human body, but we're never gonna match it.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah. Hey, you mentioned Dawkins a couple of times. I just incidentally, I've been quite interested by some of the change in tone from him over the last couple of years. he talks about intelligent design being a really exciting scientific hypothesis now, which is a little bit different to what he was saying 10 years ago. Maybe he's hedging his bets as he gets a bit older. But there's lots of people have flagged this one up, and I think this is relevant for quite a few of our younger people. It says here, how do you respectfully challenge evolution in the classroom?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things I would recommend is not to make it personal. So don't say, I don't believe what you're teaching on the board. It's a good idea to say, I have heard there are some very senior scientists who question this. So speak in the third person, not necessarily even stating what you believe, but just state. And then the teacher then has to argue with that senior person, not with you. So I definitely recommend that. Another thing I recommend, this has been very helpful for me personally. In my university, I've had lots of debates, conversations in the coffee room, and I will try to make it a humorous conversation. So, and not to assume it's going to be confrontational and argumentative from the beginnings. I might say to a colleague, do you really believe your ancestors are apes? This is quite a funny concept. And the whole debate is then based with humor, and I find this really, really helpful. I was once, when I was head of department, my department was being reviewed, and I had these very senior professors in front of me, and one of them was a professor of biology, and he joked, and he said, this is the guy who questions things like evolution, and he smiled, and everyone laughed. And I thought, this is fantastic. You can have a humorous and friendly discussion, so try to make it a friendly discussion, not assume it's going to be awkward and confrontational.
You mentioned kind of pointing to some senior scientists who would question that. Just on that, are there any particular resources you might point people towards? I guess your book would be a good start.
Yeah.
Coming out this Thursday.
Yeah. My book, at the beginning of my book, there are 14 scientists who write a commendation, and most of them are head of department, dean, or above, the president of the Royal Society of Surgeons. All 14 of those are very senior people. So buy my book and you'll have 14 very senior people to point to. One was head of department of microbiology at Bristol University, even really senior biologists. Also, look up the website of Truth in Science, a UK website, and there are scientists like Andy McIntosh and other scientists listed in Truth in Science. So there are really quite a few scientists out there. Also, the Discovery Institute have a list of over 1,000 PhD scientists who believe in intelligent design. So there is information out there.
Thank you, Stuart. I think you touched on this in your talk, but I think there's a few people wanting it to be developed a little bit. So this question says, where do death, disease, and genetic disorders fit into the Bible's worldview of perfect creation? Can you talk us through this a little more fully?
Yeah, this is a really important point. And yeah, you have to have sympathy with people saying, but, there's bad disease, aging in the world. Where does it all come from? So the Bible explains God created a perfect creation in the beginning with no death, no disease. God did not want death and disease in the world. God wanted perfection, perfect beauty, perfect pleasure. But then the Bible explains in Genesis chapter 3, there was a really tragic event. Adam and Eve, whom God had created, rebelled against God. They sinned. And by the way, that sin has been passed on to all of us, like COVID spreading around the whole world, where we are all sinners because Adam and Eve sinned. When Adam and Eve sinned, God said he would judge if they sinned, and he had to carry out that judgment, and he cursed creation, which was a really incredible thing that had the most enormous impact. Thorns and thistles came, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. That's where aging came in, death came in. And it's because of that that throughout the Bible there's the promise of redemption. Right from Genesis 3, we have that promise of a coming Messiah, the Lord Jesus coming into the world, a perfect Savior with a perfect way of salvation, dying on the cross in our place to take the punishment for our sins. If we believe in him, then we can know full forgiveness and have the hope of heaven. And that's why I would really encourage you to come to a church like this, to hear that gospel message clearly explained. So there are these two sides. There is this recognition that there is a creator, but then there's secondly a need to seek that creator and to seek a way of salvation. So there are two things. There's creation, but then there's the whole theology of the Bible.
Thank you, Stuart. You kind of touched on another question there, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Here's another one. Most of the examples of human outperformance are for sports designed for people. What of all the tasks that humans are outperformed by machines?
Yeah, of course, there are certain tasks where a robot can do better. If you're in a car factory, sometimes it's really useful to have a robot either to do something boring or something very fast and precise. But having said that, I work at the biggest robotics lab in the country, at the University of the West of England, Bristol Robotics Lab. I work there. And all my colleagues, they judge themselves on what's called autonomous robots and how good they are in what we call an unstructured environment. So how good is a robot at playing football or doing something where it's not all pre-programmed? Because when you have a robot in a factory building a car, it's a very repetitive, specific thing. But when you're judging a robot and you want to give a prize to a good robot, you give a prize to the robot that's clever enough to work something out, like playing football. But it's now that we realize how difficult it is to play football, because when you watch these 3 Chinese robots, the ball is moving and they're trying to recognize the ball. They're trying to work out which direction the ball's going. Is it spinning? And what do I do when it comes near me? And how do I intercept it? And what do I do when I get there? You realize how difficult it is to get a robot to work in an unstructured environment.
Thank you. Do you have a favorite design, man-made and natural?
Okay. So my favorite man-made design, I think the British Olympic cycling team, the chain drive, because when I was on the first Olympics, the Rio Olympics, people say, how did it feel just before the first race? And I say, I was utterly terrified because I just suddenly realized there were 200 million people watching live this first bicycle. And I realized the Olympic riders were so strong. You look at their legs, they can snap chains. I'd seen them snap chains. And I thought, only 2 weeks ago, we got the whole bike together. What happens if they snap a chain? So I was absolutely terrified. In the next 2 weeks, I wasn't watching it live, so I said to my wife, can you send me a message? Just tell me the chain did not break. And the first message after the first qualification race, a message came back, and it did have the word break, but it said they've broken the world record. It is the fastest bike in the world. And then we went on to win 6 gold medals in Rio, and that was a really nice feeling, actually.
It's not really fair, is it, that Sir Jason Kenny and Sir Chris Hoy got all the credit?
Exactly. Yeah, it should be it's more the designers than the riders, I think. And as for God's design, I mean, that's a really difficult question, but I think the human voice is one of the most special designs. The human voice is the biggest challenge to atheism and evolution, because according to the whole atheistic worldview, we have a voice because we needed to scream at a lion, or a woman needs to scream because she was being raped. But how do you then explain the beauty of the human voice? But the beauty of the human voice is exactly what you'd expect if God had designed us to praise him.
Thank you. There are still lots of questions coming in. We're not going to be able to answer them all, because I think we need... If I say to the people in the kitchen, maybe if we can have 5 minutes, we're coming up to an hour. Oh, there you are. 5 minutes? Yeah, we're coming up to an hour, so I think we'll... I know you've got to go back to Trowbridge, but how quickly are you heading off? Are you around for a little while? Or?
Yeah, around for a little while, till 7:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are then. Great. So make the most of the fact that Stuart is hanging around for a bit. Somebody here put this question early on, so I think it'd be helpful to just ask you. It says, Dr. Stuart, are you acquainted with Stephen C. Mayer's work?
Yep. Yeah, well, my book is published by the Discovery Institute. They don't publish that many books. A couple of the previous ones were Stephen Mayer's, and they said, well, following Stephen Mayer's work, we need a British engineer. So I'm really following his series of books with the Discovery Institute. Yeah.
So does he... I've never heard of Stephen Mayer, so good job you asked Stuart rather than me. But what kind of books does he write? He's
written Darwin's Doubt and Signature in the Cell, two very powerful books. His focus is on how biology is full of information, and that points to God. They're very, very good, particularly good for academic and students. They're previous in this series.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just a couple questions to finish. It says here, is it biblical to state that humans are perfectly designed? Is it not hubristic of us to claim perfection when we live in a fallen world?
Yeah. As I'm explaining, and if it's not clear, buy the book on Thursday, and it will become clear. God created us with perfection at the beginning of creation. Adam and Eve would have had perfection, no genetic faults. Since Adam and Eve, we are accumulating genetic faults. But if you put those genetic faults to one side, you are looking at a perfect design, and often that is possible to recognize what is a genetic fault. It's not hubris on our part. God is perfect, and everything God's ever done has been perfect. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Final question. This is my favourite one, so I've saved it to the end. But somebody said, you have touched on this, but we'll finish with it as well. How can we get to know this Creator?
Yeah, it's important to seek Him. As I said, I would really recommend coming to a church like this on a Sunday to hear the message explained, to speak with other people, to hear their story of how they came to find God. To pray to Him is really important. It's also good to go to good resources. There's a lot of good resources on the internet. If you are interested in creation, there's creation.com. As I said before, I actually have a book table, and at the back of my books, I explain the need to seek after a creator. So it's really prayer. But the thing I would most encourage you is to come to this church on a Sunday to hear the gospel preached.